There are some interesting studies. They take two groups of people, and the goal is to figure out which groups create the highest quality ideas. Group one, synchronous from the very beginning. Group two is they spend half of the allotted time writing out their own ideas by themselves, and then they spend the second half collaborating as a group. Almost universally, group two has better ideas, and they had some criteria for judging the quality of the ideas. None of these studies do the third example, which is what if they never collaborate? What if each person just spends the entire time in deep focused work time and creates their own ideas? That might even be the better outcome of all of them.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the whole idea behind when to meet synchronously and why, which is an interesting topic because a lot of times I think people default to thinking things that should be synchronous can actually be done asynchronously, that being through email or through small text-based communications. When you think about sync time, like how do you think about that in general?
I think it's important to be intentional about what sync time is for. There are several reasons why synchronous time might be useful. Synchronous video time, it's really the only way, other than in person, to convey emotional information. Written communication is necessarily devoid of emotional context. You have to make assumptions about the tone and the intent behind it. But when somebody is synchronous and you can hear their voice and you can see their face and you can pick up on a lot more of these cues, it can de-escalate a situation that could otherwise have escalated into a much more complex situation. Some of the other use cases for synchronicity is when there is misalignment and a rapid back and forth is helpful. I find this is pretty infrequent, if I'm being honest, but it does happen. A good example of this is the conversation that I had with Scott and Andrew about use of Slack at the company and synchronicity generally. I think we've resolved all of the outstanding questions that I had and the other questions you had from the doc.
No, I don't think so. I'm happy with this. It solves all my issues.
This is cool. We could, I actually really like this sort of like, maybe not detox because it comes as a little bit of a social stigma, but I think there's like there's almost like a baptism or a cleansing into Slack that we're going to sort of do with people,
That really could only have been done synchronously because there was sufficient misalignment that we were not going to be able to come to a resolution in written form. Oftentimes when things are done asynchronously, sometimes they rapidly converge on an answer, which is great. I think probably 3/4, maybe 9/10 of the memos that we write, the thought is all written out, and then everyone adds their thoughts, and then it just rapidly converges on the obvious correct answer, and then we can move from there. Other times, it does the opposite, which is there's this proliferation of ideas and a rapid divergence in terms of finding a solution. Sometimes the only correct answer is to get on a phone call. We call them decision meetings, which is get on a phone call with the intent to resolve any of these edge cases and come to a decision by the end of the conversation. It helps to only have 2 or 3 people in those calls, typically, whoever the stakeholders are. That decision meeting, after everything has been written out and understood and discussed, is often a really good point of finality on the decision.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that reference point, like the decision was made in this meeting, this was the conversation. Figuring out what the intent of the synchronous time is really important. I think that most jam sessions, as they're typically called, are a complete and utter waste of time. There's this assumption that collaboration is good, like during the course of the thought process, that I think is actually toxic to overall workplace productivity. I think we underestimate the value of giving smart people the space and the freedom to do deep work and to think through ideas more clearly. If you trust that you have really smart people letting them think through the idea all the way to the end, and then collaborating on it after that, instead of this intermediate phase where it's constantly being interrupted.
This is a personal analogy, and it makes it relatively easy. I can tell you firsthand from writing songs that what doesn't work is a bunch of people come together and just start strumming their instruments. But what works really well is when you spend time figuring out riffs and melodies on your own, and then you pull in somebody and you say, I have this weird thing and I can't figure out where the chorus should go. Can I play it for you? And then you play it, and the person goes, oh, this is the chorus, ba-da-da-da-da, whatever it is. And then you go, holy, that's it. That wasn't born from a jam session. That was born from somebody had enough time to do deep work, writing a song on their own, where it's like you sit down and session over session. It can take a day and it can take months of iterating on this thing that's always in the back of your mind. But the way that comes together is through that synchronous time is very valuable. What isn't valuable is synchronous time, like a jam session where we all get together and strum our instruments, is the equivalent of setting up some Zoom call just to start chatting about who knows what.
Everybody knows that I am incredibly averse to meetings by default. And the reason, when you talk about the cognitive load of a meeting, is that it's incredibly disruptive to deep work. This is the manager versus the maker schedule. People who have never been in a maker schedule, like a developer, they don't understand how it's possible that if you're a programmer and you have a meeting scheduled for like 1 o'clock, you can't get anything done the entire day. It just doesn't work. Because when you're on a manager schedule, you're used to this constant context switching and you're never really doing deep work. And that's fine if that's the schedule that you have to do. Sometimes I'm in that schedule and that's fine.
The meme that floats around the internet where it's like 3:30 p.m. meeting, and that's the only thing on a person's calendar. And then the entire day before 3:30 is blocked time of mentally preparing for meeting at 3:30, because that's
totally
the expense that comes, the cognitive load, and it comes with having synchronous meetings, where sometimes they feel like more of a cognitive burden. And you can say the same with written text, where it's like, oh man, I got to write out all of this documentation to say, like, what is my reasoning for suggesting like this, and this in the lines that are written. It's entirely possible to do things that seem like they need synchronous meetings if you use a heuristic of, okay, well, am I just transmitting this information to a person? Will they be transforming it? Like, do we need to go back and forth? And if the answer is no, then you can use it and you can still experiment. So I know that we've tried things across the company, giving positive asynchronous feedback through video, where normally that seems like, okay, well, we should get on a call so I can tell Jane how great the thing was, but you can actually do that through Loom, right? Through some video communication. When you need to transform communication, and that might be due to misalignment, that might be due to, let's take two ideas about where something should go, even if you are aligned, but let's mold these ideas into one by taking time to basically play mental tennis back and forth. That's when synchronous time is very valuable. But everything else really does seem like it is asynchronous if you're just transmitting information. A lot of times people will want to meet because it feels better, and they'll avoid the documentation because you think it's going to be quicker and it takes longer. Or what happens more frequently is you think it's going to take longer and it's actually very quick. So documents, you don't need super, super long and detailed documentation. What you need is overview, some results, some learnings, like 3 buckets, write 5 bullet points, but that actually can take less than 15 minutes. And if you really want to minimize the time, you can be synchronous with yourself, where you just screen record yourself talking on a Loom. And it's like, here is the retro. I don't have time to write this, but here's 3 minutes of like overview, results, learnings. And that at least becomes a reference point for people to move forward with. So that's like a way of also minimizing this idea of sync time. That can be video, that can be written communication.
Another conversation that I had, Andrew wrote up a document on this, on the difference between hero work and collective work. Levels is very good at enabling hero work, which is the individual really deeply focusing, reaching out to people when they have questions and they need to learn more about stuff, but it's not a collective piece of work. I think there's an overemphasis at most companies on collective work. I think a big part of that is there's a political component to collective work. This is definitely something I've heard from people who work at larger companies where you need to get buy-in from people. Every person at the company needs to imprint something. Every person needs to like change the title of the piece, and they like really go hard on semantics around something trivial, just constant bike shedding, so that when it's finally delivered, they can say, see, I was responsible for that part of this, even though it didn't contribute at all. In fact, it was a huge net negative to the entire process and the final deliverable. They can at least say and have something to point to in terms of what they contributed. So I think there is a place for collective work, though, which is that in an absolute sense, more input is better, more opinions are better. It's hard to synthesize those. It's really hard to do deep work in real time with other people. I had a conversation with somebody who was on the board of a pretty large company. He's very much in the old school, like pro meeting culture, does not think that the way that we operate will lead to success. He's probably also in the camp who would say that we are negligent for building in public. It's a very old school way of thinking about building companies. It's a different mentality. I was telling him how I want to keep our board as small as possible for as long as possible. I'm not convinced that there's any additional value in having 9 to 10 board members versus having board observers or advisors or investors. I just don't think that formal board members add nearly as much value as people think that they do. And he's on a lot of boards, and he went on this long thought of an explanation for why board members are so valuable. And he gave an example of, well, there was this one board meeting that we did that this one idea came out of it. And that would have never happened if we hadn't had these quarterly board meetings. I said, oh, okay. How many people go to those board meetings? It's like, well, it's 9 people on the board. Okay, it seems like a lot. And how long are the board meetings? It's like, well, there's 3 hours. Okay, 3 hours times 9 people. Also, they're in person. Everyone has to fly in for them. It's like, you're talking about probably 10 hours of commitment per board member. You're talking 90 hours of commitment of your smartest people. Do you not think that one person, if you gave them 90 hours of like deep focused work time, could have thought of at least one idea that was maybe way better than that one idea that you came up with after years of board meetings of lots of wasted time? His answer to that was no, but obviously I think he's wrong. The people see like, oh wow, well, this one time at this one company, a conversation at a water cooler led to this outcome. But they underappreciate all of the times when people doing normal work the normal way led to massively better outcomes.